and welcome to our 26th Rising Tide Ocean podcast. This is David Helvarg. Our regular co-host, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein's unable to join us again this week, but we've got a substitute, my colleague at Blue Frontier, Natasha Benjamin. So welcome, Natasha.
Hi, David. Very excited to be here today.
And this week we're talking with my friend, John Racanelli. John is the president and CEO of the National Aquarium based in Baltimore, Maryland. Before that, he was a consultant here in California. Also has a long history with aquariums, including the Florida and Monterey Bay aquariums. So welcome aboard, John. And let's start out by asking you how you first got involved or when you first fell in love with the ocean.
Well, thanks, David. It's great to be here with you. My association with aquariums does go back a ways. It goes back even further than the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where I was fortunate enough to be on the grand opening team. I think that made me a founding flounder. I'm not sure, but before that, even longer ago, when I was in college, I had a summer job as a diver at a long forgotten marine park on the San Francisco Bay called Marine World Africa USA. And
my nephew's there.
You know that facility. It was in Redwood Shores. It's now the site of Oracle. The old ski lagoon is the lagoon that has the fountain out in front of the Oracle World headquarters. But be all that as it may, the important part is that as a diver there, at the age of 18 and 19, one of the things, really, I was an underwater janitor. I scrubbed tanks and vacuumed up, detritus and fed fish and loved all that. But I also got to swim in the dolphin tank. And that was really interesting to me. But it set in motion a lifelong questioning about whether or not that was the best life for those dolphins. And maybe later we'll come back to how that's played out in my life in the years since.
We definitely will. So you were brought up in California?
I'm a California boy, a NorCal boy. I was born in Sunnyvale and raised in the Valley. Went off to school at UC San Diego and UC Santa Cruz. Always loved diving. Got certified in 1970. It wasn't trendy then. I was a surfer and a swimmer, and kind of like you, David. I've always said I've had a love affair for the coast, as somebody has once written, and that stayed with me wherever I've been in my life. So after college, was lucky enough to get my job at the Monterey Bay Aquarium before it opened. Got to work alongside the people that founded it, and of course, got to work with Mr. David Packard, who funded it, who was a wonderful gentleman and an incredible conservationist. So I left the Monterey Bay Aquarium in the mid 90s to go become the CEO of the Florida Aquarium, to build it and open it and lead that aquarium for the first several years of its life. And we were really trying to replicate the concept of what the Monterey Bay Aquarium had done for Monterey and for California in Tampa and for Florida. We told the story of water in Florida. It was a great ride. It wasn't the Monterey Bay Aquarium. It's a great sort of second tier aquarium, sees about 600,000 people a year. But I tired of it, and I decided that was not necessarily going to describe the rest of my career. And I went back to California just before the turn of the century and started a consulting firm. And looking back, although I can't tell you it was part of any grand plan, I'm glad I did that. Those 12 years working with Sylvia Earle, IUCN, the Surfrider Foundation, a number of great, ocean-based NGOs, which is also when I met you, David. And it wasn't until 2010 when I was starting to wonder what was I going to do as an empty nester, and our son was off to college. And I remember my wife and I were thinking about moving into the city, and the phone rang, and it was a search firm, and they were looking for a CEO for the National Aquarium. And I went home that day and I said, gave me a perspective I would not have had if I'd stayed in the aquarium world for my entire career. I said to Susan, remember we talked about moving into the city? And she said, yeah. I said, what if that city was a little east of here? She said, what, Oakland? And I said, no, keep going. She said, we're not going to Reno. I said, no, I think you've got to go quite a bit further. How about Baltimore? And rather than saying what, she said, well, that sounds interesting. And that got us here. She was as intrigued as I was. And I got here in 2011. It's almost 10 years now. And it's been an amazing ride, taking this wonderful facility and group of people and really growing its mission to a more national and even global aspiration with a vision to change the way humanity cares for the ocean planet that sustains us. So the National Aquarium, which has been around for 40 years now, has had over 60 million visitors in its history, 6 million of whom are students that have come here free of charge to partake in various programs. So the numbers are always important, but I think what's even more important is we've really evolved it in my 10 years here from a great attraction that had some good education programs to a conservation organization that has a great aquarium that carries that conservation message, I think, more effectively and more efficiently and further than it ever did before. And that vision is towards changing the way humanity cares for our ocean planet.
Great. Thank you, John. I'm curious, you talk about the millions of visitors that the aquarium had. How has the last year impacted your aquarium, and how have you survived during this pandemic?
Well, like everybody in the aquarium and zoo profession, it's been a really tough time. In fact, like everybody on the planet, it's been a tough time. We certainly had a huge financial hit. Like most U.S. aquariums, we are self-sustaining. We're a nonprofit, but we have to pay our own freight. And about 80% of the income that we receive comes through the gate, comes from people coming and various expenditures that they make. So being closed for 109 days and then being reopened at a much more reduced rate for the 6 months since then has definitely had its impact on us. We lost about $20 million in total revenue, which is it's an appreciable amount of money anywhere, but it's a big percentage for us. We cut way back on a variety of things. We managed to cut our expenses by about 7 or 8 million. We did qualify for, a federal paycheck protection loan and that kind of thing, but it was tough. And our team did an incredible job getting through it, reopening, redeploying everybody in different roles. Didn't end up having to lay off very many people. We had to lay off some people, about 20 people, but nothing like what many in our profession have had to face. So we count our blessings. We're back operating now. We're operating quite gently. It is really the best time in the history of the National Aquarium to visit because you get the aquarium to yourself. We keep the attendance down so dramatically from its normal levels.
One of the conservation approaches you've taken that certainly got a lot of notice in recent years was when you got to the aquarium, there were dolphins there. And one of your first thoughts was that maybe dolphins don't belong in an aquarium. That goes back to when you were a young diver at Marine World Africa, USA. But now you had a chance to do something about it. What'd you do?
It is interesting. When I left Marine World, went back to college, and then went on to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which of course has never had any cetaceans in its operation. I remember thinking, well, I guess I dodged that bullet. Others will solve that challenge. I knew even back in those years of the 80s that this was something that was probably reaching the end of its value to humanity. But weirdly, 35 years went by and I found myself here and suddenly the steward of a population of dolphins that had been living here for all their lives. And yeah, I found that I needed to look at what the future was going to be for those dolphins. And we convened a group of people, mostly our own people, but also some really smart people from outside. And we talked about what is optimal for dolphins now and what does it mean for humans to care for dolphins? We've learned so much about their needs, their special requirements, their social complexity compared to the 1990s when this facility was built for dolphins, that we really felt that it was time for a significant evolution. And that led to the decision that we announced in 2016 that we were going to move our dolphins to an ocean water sanctuary. Our goal was to get it done by 2020 or 21. Right now, we haven't met that goal. There's a variety of reasons. Most of them are either financial or frankly, climate change driven. We set our sights on the Florida Keys for a number of years. We explored 60 locations there. We found a beautiful island way down in the lower Keys called Cudjoe Key. Cudjoe Key has the distinction of being where Hurricane Irma came ashore in 2018. So we realized that the Keys, unfortunately, as we think about housing dolphins for at least the next 50 years, if not longer, we're not sure you can count on the Keys to be a landmass in that time frame.
Sea level rise, intensified storms.
That's exactly right, David. And as a result, we had to rule out the Keys, which was really tough to do. We had looked briefly at other possibilities, Texas, other parts of Florida. But then we started thinking about the Caribbean, and that led us to Puerto Rico. And we will build the sanctuary in Puerto Rico. Our goal is to complete this project and have the dolphins there by the end of 2023. We have found a fabulous bay there. We're working with there's a wind farm adjacent to it. We're working with the wind farm owner to get a little patch of land to put the landside facilities. But what really matters is the bay itself, and it's optimal. It's ideal it's the kind of place dolphins live. And I think that's the issue that we came to was we can't provide dolphins with the kind of habitat and the kind of living conditions for which nature has superbly prepared them over the last 80 million years. We can't do that in an aquarium setting. Try as we might. We could put a biodome over the entire inner harbor out my window here and still come up with a fairly crummy replication of the world that dolphins were built for.
And so this sanctuary isn't just for your 5 or 6 dolphins. It would be open for others.
That's correct. Our goal is first of all, to establish a facility that could accommodate up to 20 dolphins. And I should note that we've had calls from several other entities in the dolphin trade who have also confronted the fact that they too want to find a better way. And it will not be hard. In fact, it will be too easy to fill that sanctuary with the 20 dolphins that we think would be its capacity. In fact, where I see it all going is that there will be a network of these facilities around the world, certainly in the tropical belt, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, Asia, Australia. And these will be the place where the 3,600 cetaceans now living in captivity will eventually find their way home. And presumably, we will all adhere to the idea that we're not going to breed the dolphins in those settings. They will be the last ones to potentially live in human care. And then a 100-year experiment in one species having dominion over another will maybe in a best case, it could come to a close and we could get back to just enjoying dolphins and whales where they thrive in the ocean.
Thank you, John. You've spoken about how the aquariums have changed, and in terms of dolphins and cetaceans and aquariums, a lot of things have changed for aquariums, including conservation messaging. Can you talk about how the National Aquarium has incorporated that into their programming?
We have a conservation action plan that we have made we've kind of lifted to the top of our hierarchy of needs. It has 3 basic overarching goals: to combat climate change, to save wildlife and habitats, and to stop plastic pollution. So these are really strong verbs: combat, save, and stop. And that's because we need to take this thing on. I'm not telling you two anything that you don't know, and probably your listeners. We collectively, we humans, need to get our act together. And we believe, as do many of our peers, by the way, that we have a great kind of bully pulpit for doing this, because we do attract so many people. We touch so many millions of others through the various social media memes and other vehicles that we have. But on site, while here, having this kind of emotional bonding experience with each other, with their family members, their loved ones, and with the animals that they get a chance to see, and in some cases through the glass interact with. This is a time when the funnel's open, and it's a great time to be able to pour into that funnel some of the ideas that we're trying to cause our public to capture. So we have a team of people who are professional interpreters of climate change communication. They work both directly on the floor with our guests, but also training every other staff member to communicate climate change in ways that aren't intimidating, that aren't frightening to people, but are nonetheless compelling and create a sense with people that they can make the difference. And that's really our central tenet, is that through that conservation action plan, we want people to walk away believing that they can help combat climate change. They can contribute to saving wildlife and habitats, and they personally can make a dent in the plastic pollution crisis that we're all facing.
Right. And with aquariums, aside from collecting wild fish, there's this movement of breeding some incredible species like sea dragons. And
actually, it's becoming a real driving force for the accredited aquariums in the U.S. and beyond. We now breed, I think, 45 different species of fish. And it's really surprisingly simple. We harvest eggs and then we incubate the eggs. And oftentimes the eggs that we're harvesting and incubating, we don't even know the species until they start to grow out, because they are, at the egg stage, a lot of fish look pretty similar. But the good news there is that we've had some remarkable breeding successes in species that are common and popular in public aquariums. And that obviates the need to go out to the ocean and collect for them. There are very few species for which that is an issue right now. Collecting for public aquaria does not have the impact on the environment that collecting for private collections does. That's where some of the, dory and what's his name are unfortunately collected in huge numbers. And so
Nemo.
Thank you. So anemone fish and other small tropicals that are very popular thanks to movies like those are at risk now, because so many people want to have them in their home aquariums. But that's part of our message too, is just to talk to people about the fact that we can enjoy the natural environment. We can get little moments of windows into it, but we don't need to capture everything and collect it and put it into small boxes at homes throughout the world.
And of course, the aquariums are educating both to the wonders and warnings of the sea. I mean, the reproductive strategies in the ocean are pretty amazing. I don't think Disney, with Finding Nemo, was ready to admit that if his mom was lost to a barracuda, then his dad would within 3 days transform to become his new mom.
The hermaphroditic aspects are something that I'm sure, I don't think Disney's figured out a way to interpret yet, but we love telling people about it at the aquarium. Kids love it. They're always blown away by some of those kinds of facts. That's a beauty. I think even further than that too, we focus a lot of our time and energy on rescue. And all aquariums do now. And that's become a central role. We've built a facility a mile from the aquarium specifically for that purpose. It has two purposes. One is to care for animals that we bring in, whether quarantining or, in our case, now culturing corals to support the Florida Reef Track Rescue Project, which is a joint venture of, I think, about 20 aquariums in the U.S. now. We're all growing out clusters of about 27 different species of Florida corals, all of which, stony corals, all of which are at risk from this wasting disease that's been attacking the Florida coral reefs now for several years. We're all keeping these genetically safe and non-infected colonies and growing them out in our aquariums back of house. Ours is in the Animal Rescue and Care Center, with the ultimate and with a partnership with Florida Fish and Wildlife, in hopes of being able to repatriate some of these in the areas that have been hardest hit by the disease.
So you're growing like endangered elkhorn and staghorn corals, and at the same time you're rescuing animal wildlife. We just saw with a climate-linked cold snap in Texas, thousands of cold shock turtles that had to be rescued, sea turtles.
The single biggest cold stun event in the history of America that we know of, at least since humans have been hanging around the beach. And so I think it was 4,000 animals were rescued. I saw some pictures that were just stunning. I mean, they were just rooms full. Now, that's a short-term cold stun event. Those animals were marginally stunned. I mean, they were still stunned and they were hurt. The bigger event that occurs annually now in Cape Cod is, of course, the New England cold stun, which in its worst years has brought in well over 1,000 turtles. Of course, all sea turtles are endangered, but Kemp's Ridleys are particularly so, and then greens and some loggerheads. And those are all brought to aquariums like ours. We've got 18 of them over in the Animal Care and Rescue Center as we speak. This year we named them after constellations, which is kind of cool. So you've got Andromeda and Cassiopeia, which is a little more activating than 2 years ago, which was breakfast foods, where we had mocha and McMuffin.
No, your sea turtles should all be stars.
Exactly.
Not edible names.
Not edible. It just didn't work for me. Anyway, the good news is they don't stay here long. They're rescued on the beach. There, they've been severely stunned, in many cases hypothermic, secondary injuries, pneumonia, eye injuries, shell injuries. As they get more and more lethargic, they're less and less able to defend themselves against rocks and boats and surf. When they get to the beach, sometimes their temperature, their core temperature, is at the ambient temperature, which can be in the 30s. The team up there at the Wellfleet Rescue Center brings them ashore, triages them, starts the process of bringing them back up to functional temperature. We continue that after they are either trucked or flown down to facilities like ours. and then ultimately treat them for all the other secondary issues. We've released now, I think the number is, we had 128 sea turtles last year that came through the aquarium. In fact, went down to Florida, and then in summer were released off the beaches here. And then there's the seals, and the seals are a sight to behold. Our team got real clever this year, and they named them after storybook characters. So last year's primary star was Pippi Longstocking. She was here for 8 months because she had an ear infection. We just got into new characters. One is Eloise. She's not at the Plaza Hotel, though. She's at the Animal Care and Rescue Center. And now Stuart Little. Yeah. Is that the mouse? Yeah.
Yep.
So they're over at the rescue center. One's a gray seal. One is a harp seal. And these little guys are both pups, both somehow separated from their mothers, still maternally dependent, still in a very serious growth mode and needing to learn how to eat fish and catch fish. So that's what our guys teach them. And sometime this spring, they'll both go out to Assateague National Park, and we'll turn them loose into the ocean and track them for a couple of weeks, make sure they're on the right track, and get them into the world again. So it's really a wonderful role that zoos and aquariums play. And I'm pleased to say that in the COVID relief bill, which I believe is on its way to the president today, it includes for the first time ever, some funding for the Fish and Wildlife Service to provide support for organizations like ours that do this rescue work, so that we can keep doing it on behalf of our government and do right by endangered species and actually cover the cost.
And protect our coastal communities, both human and wild.
Exactly right.
So I know the aquarium has done a lot of outreach and engagement with people in the community, and maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Here in Baltimore, what we've seen is that there is a huge level of interest in finding ways to improve communities, to regreen areas, to plant trees in these communities, to establish the nation's first urban wildlife refuge here at Masonville Cove, which is now a completely wonderful little nature area with an interpretive center that we co-operate with several other nonprofits and with the Fish and Wildlife Service, where you can now see nesting bald eagles, you can find red foxes, you can find 27 different varieties of nesting and of migratory seabirds. There's just all kinds of moments of truth that you can see in a setting like this if you learn how to look. And that's what we're working with a lot of our residents to do. And that is something we hope to export further and further afield to our peers in the aquarium and zoo world for a long time to come.
I wanted to add one thing that you reminded me of. One of my first jobs when I was in college was at the New England Aquarium, working on rearing lobsters and jellies. And I think that was instrumental for me, and I'm sure many other young people. Their exposure to the aquarium, internships at the aquarium. I was a docent at the aquarium. That was a turning point for me in terms of my career in ocean conservation and marine science. And I wanted to highlight how important those aquariums, especially in urban settings, how critical they are for reaching youth and reaching young people and really catapulting them into the ocean conservation world.
That is so true, Natasha. I think that is probably one of the most important functions that we serve. We've created around the floating wetland that we've now prototyped out in the water here just outside the aquarium. We have a 140 square foot floating wetland, which is a lot of work to maintain. The problem with floating wetlands is that the more successful you are, the more biomass you grow on the floating wetland. As that biomass increases, the floating wetland has a terrible tendency to sink under its own weight. So we've created a virtual submarine style one that has ballast tanks, aerators, lift stations, a little creek in the center. It's become a home for a variety of species, but most importantly, it's the test bed for what will be a huge complex that will comprise from 140 square feet to 14,000 square feet. And already we're using it for a program for sixth graders in the Baltimore City School District called What Lives in the Harbor. The kids come down, they spend the day here. Well, in pre and post COVID times, they will have and will. They postulate what they're going to find. We drop some little trap nets out around the floating wetland and bring up various animals that are in those. We drop some cameras in the water to look at some of the sessile organisms and some of the other encrusting organisms. And then we show them some video of some of the episodic visits that we've had. They end up seeing American eels, of course, blue crabs. We had a nesting blue heron on the floating wetland last year. He ate a lot of the fish around it, by the way. He was really having a good time. And all told, dozens of species of animals and birds, and even a muskrat who showed up one day in the winter when the thing was covered in snow, spent the night, and then swam off the next morning. So these kids are getting this great experience right here, and they're fulfilling an important state curriculum requirement called a MIWI, a Meaningful Watershed Education Experience. And the funny part about that is, or the sad part, until we came along, a lot of teachers in public schools in this city would take kids to a storm drain in order to get their MIWI. That was how they told them about this fabulous system called the Chesapeake Watershed. They'd say, well, okay, this is a drain. Now this leads to a pipe that leads to a storm drain that leads to the bay, that leads to the harbor. And now they can actually bring them down to the water. And for some of these kids, they don't have that much interaction with the water until this program came along. So
what's the program called again?
It's called What Lives in the Harbor. And it's amazing what the kids come up with. The single biggest surprise for the kids is that things live in the harbor at all. They go into it thinking, I didn't think anything lived in that harbor. And they start seeing American eels that are growing out before they make their epic migration to the Sargassum Sea to breed. A 1,000-mile migration, these little eels the size of a garter snake. Or they learn about the life cycle stages, the blue crabs who molt now on the floating wetland in the little creek, safe from predators for that terrible day when they're at such risk because their shell is as soft as tissue. And then they harden up and they swim off. So they're learning all these really cool stories about the microhabitats of the Chesapeake Bay, and that's just so satisfying to see.
And these are hopeful stories. The New York Bight, the Boston Harbor, the Inner Harbor in Baltimore, which is life's coming back, and nature is incredibly resilient once we start doing the right things. I think
true. I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful about both the outlook for that kind of work and also the outcomes that I think will result. I believe that our nation has figured out it needs responsible adults in charge, and we may be in for a 8 to 12 year phase where the government gets that too and wants to support the work of organizations like ours. Baltimore is a city that is full of hope and full of opportunity, but it's also a city that has a lot of people that have had a really tough life and a very high poverty rate here. 75% of the kids here are on school lunch assisted lunch programs. So we want to break that cycle. We do believe that environmental justice is social justice. They're immiscible. They are two sides of the same equation. And in our work around DEI and J, we've made it our trademark to be the ones that are looking out for and trying to create opportunities around more equitable environmental justice in cities like ours and others. And I think that's a role that is going to keep us busy for a long time. On the broader question of aquariums, as long as we can continue to create habitats in these controlled microcosmic settings that we have, that replicate as faithfully and as realistically as possible the real world that we're trying to present to people. As long as we can do that, we have a job to do, and it's a noble one.
Now that you're in Baltimore, how do you get your ocean stokes these days?
They're fewer and further in between, especially in the off season. I do get out to the coast. I've learned to surf Cape Henlopen, which is in Delaware. In fact, it's just down the way from Joe's beach house. Actually, the first real trip that Susan and I will be taking this year is to Puerto Rico next month. And it is in part to do a little bit of business there, to talk to some of our colleagues that we're working with. But we're going to slip over to Rincon and spend 5 days there. And I think she's going to be at the pool and I'm going to be in the salt water. I need that saltwater therapy. I do miss it in the winter months. Diving in the tanks here is fun, but you kind of get it's like knowing your backyard. Sometimes you need to get outside.
There's nothing like warm saltwater therapy after spending a winter on the East Coast or up in Northern California here.
My ears and I don't miss the cold NorCal waters. I had 8 cases of surfers here in my time there, so I'm not missing that part.
I hope you get some great sets at Rincon, and Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you both, and thanks for the work you do, both of you. I know it is meaningful and it's broad-reaching, and I applaud you for it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Rising Tide is a production of Blue Frontier with host David Helberg and support from Natasha Benjamin, Ellie Curlow, and myself, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein. Rising Tide's editing services and additional technical support are provided by Studio Kate May of San Diego, California. The theme song is written and performed by Ethan Kenbark. You can find Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast, at www.bluefront.org or download it anytime from Apple, Google, or Spotify.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free, the sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the blue frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are. Good boy, Sparky.